잠시 맞다. 아니, 왜 이러냐고.
이거밖에 없어.
친구.
I need to download the chat program.
Good afternoon. Pandit 찬로차나킷. Nice to meet you.
How are you? Good to see you.
Basically, I do read the script that I prepare. Best. 20 minutes? 15. Okay. Okay, I know. Yeah, it's okay. Actually, we want to have more room for discussion.
Yeah, right.
했어요.
네, 지금부터 광주 민주포럼 5월 20일 3일차입니다. 마지막 이제 폐막을 앞두고 아시아 전반의 민주주의를 돌아보는 그런 뜻깊은 세션이라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 오늘 세션에서 그 아시아의 민주주의를 전망한다는 제목으로 오늘 2시간 동안 발제자 아시아 각국에서 오신 발제자분들의 발제를 듣고 난 후에 또 캄보디아, 태국, 미얀마 이렇게 세 국가는 4시부터 별도의 온라인으로 그 어떻게 이 민주주의에 관련돼서 연대하고 발전시켜 나갈 것인가를 토론하는 또 분할 토론 세션도 연이어 진행됩니다. 그래서 오늘 참여하신 분들께서는 발제도 들어주시고 또 이 후속되는 또 그 각 국가별의 민주주의 세션에도 참여해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 이번 세션에 사회를 맡은 저는 국제민주연대 나현필 사무국장입니다. 이렇게 뜻깊은 세션에 저를 사회자로 불러주신 5.18 기념재단과 광주 민주포럼 측에 먼저 감사 인사드립니다. 그러면 오늘 세션에서 먼저 첫 번째 세션으로는요. 첫 번째 발표로는 홍콩에 관련돼서 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 홍콩은 많은 분들께서 기억하시겠지만 2019년도에 대규모 홍콩 시민들의 시위가 있었고 그 이후로 지속적으로 홍콩 당국의 탄압으로 인해서 지금 굉장히 어려운 상황에 처해 있습니다. 2020년 이후에 홍콩 상황에 대해서 홍콩 활동가 분께서 발제를 해주실 텐데요. 저는 이제 개인적으로 지금 발제하신 홍콩 활동가 분을 알고도 있고 또 너무너무 사실 보고 싶었던 분인데, 근데 말씀드렸듯이 홍콩 당국의 탄압 이런 과정으로 인해서 이름조차도 지금 민주포럼에서 이렇게 본명을 밝힐 수 없는 그런 사정인 거 참여하신 분들께서 이해해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 그럼 첫 번째 홍콩 활동가의 발표를 듣도록 하겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다. Eric, can you start?
Oh, yes. Good afternoon, my friends in Korea, my friends in Gwangju, and good morning, good evening to everyone who are joining today online. I am Eric. I'm very glad to be invited to this Democracy Forum. I met many of you here 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we were in Hong Kong and when we were in Seoul. And I'm happy to meet you again. I was an activist in Hong Kong in the previous years, and now I am an academic on Hong Kong law and politics and human rights. And today, I would like to share with you the experience of Hong Kong now with regards to democratic development and human rights in Hong Kong. And I'm sure my friends in the conference room have prepared my slides, so I just I don't need to share my slides, I guess. And perhaps we can begin with the first slide. And I guess everyone can see the slides here. So I would like to begin with the recent arrest of 5 pro-democracy leaders in Hong Kong. They include, in the middle, Cardinal Sen, a Catholic cardinal, and he is now 90 years old. And besides him, on the right-hand side are 2 former lawmakers. One is a human rights lawyer, Margaret Ng, and other is at the end, at the right second is Sid Ho, a former lawmaker now in jail. On the left-hand side is scholars in cultural studies, and then it is a activist singer called Dennis Ho. Oh, can you see my slides now? Please let me know if you can see my slides. I can see it in the chat room. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you. So 5 of them were arrested because they were charged by the local national security police as colluding with foreign forces, meaning they have ties with foreign groups or foreign organizations. But we do not know why running a humanitarian fund could be colluding with foreign forces, having ties with foreign forces. And what they have done for Hong Kong was that, if you remember, in 2019, there were more than 10,000 protesters being arrested. And this humanitarian fund have helped at least 4,000 protesters for their legal aid, medical aid, and many kinds of emergency support for the protesters and their families. It is an act of humanitarianism rather than promoting hatred or promoting discontent against the government. So the arrest of Cardinal Sen, as well as other trustees of this fund, should alarm you and should recall your own experience in Korea, when the Korean Catholic Church was so supportive of the democracy movement back in 1980s and 1990s. And the Hong Kong National Security Police cracking down on this humanitarian fund also have a strong implication to civil society in Hong Kong, because it also has supported many civil society organizations to do human rights advocacy and human rights documentation of all the violations. And unfortunately, many of the NGOs I worked with when I was in Hong Kong have now been disbanded. The situation in the past 1.5 years was so disturbing and so saddening. This is a research done by an NGO called Safeguard Defenders. And since the national security law in Hong Kong was passed in 2020, we have more than 70 NGOs in Hong Kong. They either dissolved, disbanded, or they were criminalized, prosecuted by the Hong Kong government, including Amnesty International. They closed their offices in Hong Kong. Student unions who were active and leading the local social movement, human rights movement in Hong Kong for many decades. And trade unions, the Confederation of Trade Union, which is the largest Trade Union Alliance in Hong Kong. And of course, my group, the Civil Human Rights Front, it was disbanded after a loss of political pressure from government media and national security police. And the disbandment and the dissolution of Hong Kong civil society is a big backsliding of Hong Kong's democratic movement and human rights movement. It was because before the national security law in Hong Kong was imposed in 2020, civil society has a lot of open and free civic space. Because Hong Kong has the rule of law, NGOs trust we have judicial independence, that NGOs were happy to register in Hong Kong to act according to the law and act independently. And we believe Hong Kong had the rule of law and has most of the human rights protections according to the ICCPR, to the international human rights laws under the United Nations. And we used to think the government, although it was not fully democratic, like in Korea or in other Asian countries, but it was still accountable to the society, to the public at all. But after the national security law was imposed in Hong Kong, between 2020 and 2022, excuse me, we have seen the law gave a lot of power to the police to investigate NGO activists and to search and to freeze the assets of NGOs in Hong Kong without a warrant, without the agreement of the court. And by now, we have nearly 200 political, nearly 200 individuals, activists, and NGO leaders were arrested, including trade union leaders, including Catholic Cardinal Sen, including young activists like Joshua Wong. They are all pending for trial. We have more than 100 political prisoners. They haven't been tried. They haven't been tried. They haven't been convicted. But most of them are now in jail because the court denied their bail and they have to stay in the jail until they have their trials. And many of them have been in pre-trial detention for more than 1 year. So this was a very disturbing phenomenon, and civic space in Hong Kong became much more diminished. We used to feel that Hong Kong has free press and free speech. Newspapers criticizing the government would not be arrested. People who publicly blamed or insult government officials would not be challenged or would not be prosecuted. But now it is not the case. The government used many legal tools to arrest ordinary citizens for making public speeches against the government. We have recently union leaders in Hong Kong being charged with sedition by publishing a cartoon book, a comic book, a children's book about their rights to protest. And the government saw that as inciting hatred against the government. And we also have individuals who disagree with the government policy on COVID pandemic and the government policy on vaccination. When they make Facebook posts, they were arrested by the police because the government said these people are promoting hatred and against the government, against the vaccination policy, and it is about national security. We used to have peaceful assembly in Hong Kong, but now, because the government used COVID measures and used national security law, they can ban all the peaceful assemblies, no public protest, and they will see some protests as subversive, promoting subversion against the government of Hong Kong and China. And they have censored many free associations, but worse still, as I said, since more than 100 political leaders and activists are now charged by national security law, and they are the leaders of Hong Kong's NGOs and civil society. The local civil society in Hong Kong is fully disempowered. They are disempowered because we don't have enough leaders, we don't have enough resources, and people were afraid to participate. Because if you join a peaceful assembly that was blamed by the government as subversion or promoting separation of Hong Kong, you can be sent to jail for 10 years, 20 years, or even in life jail. And the new national security law has prohibited local individuals and organizations to build international solidarity in the name of colluding with foreign forces. Like me, if I promote Hong Kong human rights issues to overseas groups like you or like to speak to other governments, then I can be charged if I were in Hong Kong. And this is has a big impact for many NGOs, because many of the NGOs in Hong Kong have solidarity with international society, with you, my friends, with friends in Asia, with friends across the world. And among them, the government crackdown on two independent media has caused a lot of concern from international society community. And in the coming months, we have three human rights defenders who organized the June 4th Tenement Massacre commemoration every year on June 4th. They were charged with inciting subversion because the Hong Kong alliance that they served in, this NGO alliance, they call for the end of one-party dictatorship, and they call for a democratic China since 1989, after the Tenement Massacre. And now they are in jail, but they do not have trial yet. They are in custody, and many of them are calling for the release of these political prisoners. And we have 47 pro-democracy party leaders, movement leaders in Hong Kong. They were also charged with subversion, including law professors, young activists, opposition party leaders, because they engaged in a peaceful citywide primary elections before the official elections in Hong Kong 2 years ago. And they could be jailed for life. They could be jailed for 20 years or 30 years. And we don't know when their trial will begin. They are now all in jail, in custody, waiting for trial. And to end my presentation, I guess we can have more time to discuss in the Q&A sessions, but I guess what we need to do is to focus on human rights. Hong Kong is very special in China because China did not ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. But Hong Kong, as a part of China, this city applies the ICCPR rights in its own basic law and its own local laws. So therefore, Hong Kong has a stake in international human rights mechanisms in the United Nations. And although the national security law prohibits any collusion with foreign forces, with foreign governments or foreign organizations, but China is still engaging in multinational or international platforms, including the United Nations. And Hong Kong will soon be reviewed by the United Nations Human Rights Committee this July, this summer, on the human rights developments in Hong Kong. In other words, the UN Human Rights Committee, they will review Hong Kong government's implementation of the ICCPR rights in Hong Kong in the past years. So this is an opportunity for everyone to pay attention to how international solidarity, international platforms can review Hong Kong's human rights situations together. And I hope you will still pay attention to Hong Kong, because the human rights issues in Hong Kong is not alone. Hong Kong used to be read as an important experiment for realizing human rights and democracy in China. Now it seems it doesn't work in the short term, although Hong Kong has a strong legacy of human rights protections and democratic movement for 3 decades, for 30 years. But now we are having a big challenge. So I am not asking you to do anything for Hong Kong, but I'm asking you to pay attention and to support Hong Kong in your own way. So thank you very much, and I look forward to exchange further with you in the later session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Please visit Korea again, especially Gwangju. 네, 제가 2년 만에 친구가 이렇게 얼굴 보면서 얘기하는 거 들으니까 좀 약간 감정이 올라와서 죄송합니다. 다음으로는 이게 참 공교롭네요. 2019년 그리고 20년을 지나면서 이제 홍콩 이슈가 굉장히 아시아에서 뜨거웠었고 또 한국에서도 굉장히 많이 연대를 했었습니다. 근데 제 기억이 맞다면 2020년 가을에 태국에서도 대규모 시위가 있었고 또 거기에 태국 시위대 진압에 한국산 살수차가 동원돼서 그것 때문에 저도 막 기자회견 했었던 기억이 납니다. 근데 오늘 이 자리에 너무 이렇게 귀한 손님이 오셨습니다. 태국 출라롱콘대학교의 판딧 찬로차나킷 교수님께서 직접 오셔서 태국의 민주주의에 관련된 발제를 직접 해주시겠습니다. 프로페서, just
Thank you, Mr. Park. And I'd like to read my paper that I prepared for this event. My paper's title is Thailand on the Long and Rough Road to Democracy. First section, looking back on 2021, a year like no other. Thailand has been under military junta from 22nd of May 2014 until the promulgation of 2017 Constitution on 5th April 2017. The junta government called for a general election on 24th of March 2019. The Constitution architects make sure that design that during the first 5 years, the Senate could be able to vote for Prime Minister. Such transitory provision thus guarantee the transition of General Prayut Chan-o-cha from Prime Minister in an authoritarian regime to the Prime Minister in a competitive authoritarian. Despite the fact that the junta's party were not able to gain a majority in the House of Representatives, General Prayut Chan-o-cha became the Prime Minister again with unanimous vote from the Senate, along with votes from the small political parties. When the Constitution Court dissolved the Future Forward Party on 21st February 2020, his leadership was confronted with new challenges from Future Forward supporters, the Thai youth, together with those from the pro-democratic wing who feeling how unjust it was. They have risen up against the Prayut regime, regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic. They still are fighting for the government and demanding for a new constitution, monarchy reformation, and the abolition of the Senate, and calling for a new general election. Protests and clashes in the central Bangkok and other major cities have become a normal sight. According to the Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, an independent organization, in the year 2020 was the year of protest, ceiling breaking, and political lawsuit. incidentally, the call for monarchy reform remains a taboo in Thailand, where one is not supposed to talk openly about the monarchy for fear of its lèse majesté law. However, the Thai youth movements have openly questioned the role of the newly crowned king. As a result, the leaders of such youth movements have been charged with lèse majesté and violation of national security laws. The youth's call for monarchy reform is considered to be an action tantamount to that of breaking the ceiling. To combat the coronavirus 19 outbreak, the Prayut government had declared the emergency decree that can restrict any public activity and public gathering, including protests. It should be noted that the state of emergency has been used as an excuse for the police to use excessive violence and brutality when it comes to dispersing the protester. Thus, the youth movement have called for mass protests more frequently in response to the government's suppression. From 22nd of February to 14 March 2020, there are protests in 61 universities and 37 street protests organized by high school students, university students altogether. The mass gathering also extended to provincial schools and universities in the next following months, especially after 16 October 2020 crackdown. As Mr. Park mentioned earlier, that the Gino car was imported from South Korea, and we wrote down a petition for the Korean government not to sell that Gino car to Thailand again. According to Thai Lawyer for Human Rights 2020 report, at least 234 people in 145 cases were charged as a result of their political participation between 18 July and 25 December 2020. Activists and demonstrators have been charged with criminal acts and violation of emergency decree. And if you look into the booklet, I show the cases, the number of cases. Lèse majesté law increased from 23 to 37. Article 112 for sedition from 20 to 60 cases, 3 times. Violation of emergency decree from 64 cases to 175 cases, and Public Assembly Act from 46 to 60. In its report, Thai human rights lawyer indicates that the number of people who were prosecuted even much higher than 2020. The human rights lawyer called the 2021 the year of the state retaliation, or the year of legal battles. From 18 July to 25 December 2020, the number of cases increased to 980 cases, and at least 1,747 individuals have been prosecuted. So we now encounter the state retaliation, putting law against individuals, especially the young people in university and schools. Even university professor was charged with 112 article. So there have been 1,513 individuals charged with 835 cases in 2021 alone. The leading members of student movement have been accused of violation of emergency decree and numerous lèse majesté cases. Notably, for example, Anon Nampa, the recipient of Gwangju 2021 Human Rights Award, and 24 cases, Chatupat Bunpatararaksa, the recipient of Gwangju 2017 Human Rights Award, and 19 cases against Parit Chiwarap, and Panasaya has 24 cases. So the reason that the Thai human rights lawyer entitled 2021 the year of legal battles, because Thai human rights believe that the charges are being used as political tool to haunt the action of the leaders and place legal burdens on them. Besides, such prosecution intimidate anyone who wants to challenge the regime. It should be noted that such charge lead to temporary detention by court orders, and as a result, Thai human rights lawyer requires a large amount of financial support to bail those activists out. Thus, the Thai courts have denied bailing rights on several occasions, claiming that those activists would repeat such offenses. So it's just like something that you are sentenced to be jailed even before the case ended. Most of the activists are put in prison before their final trial and court verdict. Anon Nampa had been jailed for 198 days. When they are released from prison, their movements are curtailed and they are required to wear electronic monitoring bracelets or EM machine. The tactics are widely applied to intimidate activists from staging any further political activity. So there are attempts to amend the facade constitution. It said the constitution 2017 was designed in such a way to prevent the opposition parties from gaining majority in the House of Representatives. At the same time, the constitution was also designed to prevent the Pheu Thai party or former Thai Rak Thai party from being the largest party in the House and forming a single party government. Even Palang Pracharat party, the junta's own party, also suffers such political design. Both government and its opposition wish to have a constitution amendment. There have been 14 drafts on the constitution amendment that went to the National Assembly sessions. 13 charters was proposed by representatives from both government and opposition parties, while another draft was submitted by People's Coalition. In June 2021, the National Assembly's first reading passed only the government's draft from 13 drafts. The draft will bring the two-ballot system back, and therefore it must pass other two readings to become effective. The draft went through the readings and was submitted for royal approval and published in the Royal Gazette on November 2021. The first constitutional amendment will apply to the next general election, and as a result, the number of representatives directly elected in the constituency of the House of Representatives will increase from 350 to 400. And the number of party-list representatives will fall from 150 to 100. The new electoral system will be changed from a single ballot system to a two-ballot system. Another attempt to amend the 2017 Constitution proposed by the Resolution Group, led by famous lawyer, law professor, and activist Piyabut Sanganokun Parit Vacharasintu, a former member of Democrat Party, and Yingchip Achanon, the manager of Internet Law Reform Dialogue. The movement, the resolution aims at dismantling the Prayut regime and preventing General from staying in power. In doing so, the transitory provisions must be amended, and the Senate also need to be eliminated. After running an extensive campaign, the resolution gathered 150,921 signatures of the supporters, much higher than the required minimum 50,000 signatures. When the draft went to the National Assembly's first reading, it needs 362 votes from the joint parliament, including one-third of the Senate, at minimum 84 senators. The draft received only 203 votes in favor from the House of Representatives and only 3 from the Senate. As a result, the resolution's draft was deposed. To conclude, the government's constitutional amendment was successful because it gained support from the government's coalition together with votes from Senate. It is clear that the 2017 constitution was designed to be a rigid constitution. Such complicated procedures and requirements secure the junta's future and prolonging its power from the years to come. Next section, on the court and the right to bail. As mentioned earlier, that 2021 was a year of intense legal battle with the government, filing more charges against student activists and civil rights leaders during COVID-19 outbreak. The activists had been jailed and denied the right to bail. Some of them positive for COVID-19 while in prison. The Assembly of the Poor grassroots movement and other civil movements organized an activity stand Stop in Prison, a series of protests outside the jail in Bangkok and other cities to protest against the detention of pro-democracy activists on royal defamation charges. They gathered and stood to hold vigil in front of the Supreme Court headquarters, showing placards to remind the public that student activists and leaders were still being jailed without the right to bail. The first day of protest was held on 22nd March 21. The main activity involved standing still for 112 minutes, and later on the length of time was reduced to 1 hour and 12 minutes. Both figures refer to Article 112 on the Criminal Code on lèse-majesté that student activists and protest leaders have been charged. The participants stood from 5:30 p.m. to 6:42 p.m. So they posed with the three-finger salute while observing the national anthem being played at 6 p.m. daily. The standing protest soon spread and was organized in prominent cities like Chiang Mai, Ubon Ratchathani, Ayutthaya, and Khon Kaen. The stand Stop and in Prison lasts from August 9 to March 4, 2022, except for the period of June 2nd and August 15, when the accused was granted bail. Altogether, 193 days in Chiang Mai. In Chiang Mai is a bit longer. The stand Stop in Prison may not influence court's decision to grant bail, but it has become a form of resistance that civil movement used to expose the abnormality of judicial process and to challenge the Thai establishments. The last section, prospects and challenges. To find a path to reconciliation, two challenges are waiting ahead. The first, drafting a new constitution by an elected council is the most preferred choice, but it is not likely to be a choice. The junta's facade constitution was designed to have strong Senate, which is the main obstacle toward constitutional amendments. With the Senate's intervention, the junta can continue to stay in power. To change the junta's regime, civil rights movement must push the agenda in order to draft a new social contract. Second, by granting amnesty to political prisoners and dropping charges against activists, Thailand may find a way to negotiate reconciliation. This should include reinstalling political rights of those who have been stripped off because of the political charges and verdicts during the last 2 decades. This, however, is not an option as well. This short essay is not able to offer any viable recommendations, and it seems that Thailand's road to democracy is a long and rough one. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. 네, 짧은 시간 안에 무려 5개의 발제를 해야 되는 상황이라서 바로 또 다음 발제로 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. 다음은 캄보디아의 인권과 민주주의 현황에 대해서 ADHOC, 캄보디아 인권개발협회의 메스 썰메 부대표님께서 발제를 해주시도록 하겠습니다. 캄보디아 인권개발협회는 캄보디아의 대표적인 인권단체이기도 합니다. 네, 그러면 발표 시작해 주십시오. Hello, Ms. Salme, can you start now? Yes.
Hello, good morning. Good afternoon. I apologize for the confusing of time zones in Cambodia, as we had 2 hours different. And I would like to share, can I share the screen here? Okay, first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I am Zain, Deputy Head of the Human Rights Section, and I would like to share for like around 15 to 10 minutes here. The first, I would like to share related to ADHOC. As you may know, recently ADHOC we work since 1991, and we are the biggest organization in Cambodia and also confront with also the government authority and other related institutions in Cambodia, especially the institutions who work not really respect the human rights, and also we try to protect the vulnerable group and also the people who are in high risk of human rights violation. And our vision is we want to see the society that respect the human rights and the rule of law. Our mission to educate and empower the people to realize and defend their rights, and advocate the government to representative to work for better government and to respect the human rights. And also we work recently for more than 30 years already. And second, I would like to share some context related to human rights and democracy in Cambodia. Third, share a little bit concern about Cambodia's situation, and also the last point related to recommendation. And also welcome for some question or comment or some other additional information or sharing after this. So related to the Cambodian context, as Cambodians continue to suffer from the violence of human rights concern, which such work yet to be done in terms of like we need to promoting and protecting the human rights and enhancing the independence of jurisdiction to ensure the separation of the power, and also need to ensure that the state institution of desire and capacity to respect and ensure the enforcement of the law. And also the systematic lack of human rights protection across the border system for the issues such as impunity, shortcoming in the rule of law, slow legal and judicial reform, and corruption. So it is all these issues still happening and continue to happen in Cambodia. And such issues continue to hamper democracy, in turn hiding situation and develop and reduce the poverty in Cambodia. As well as in the context of human rights is the royal government of Cambodia failed to fulfill its duty to protect the human rights and promote democracy after the communal election in 2017. As you may know that the CNLP is the biggest anti-party in Cambodia. Has been dissolved, and also some independent media also was cracked down by the government, and undermining of fundamental freedom keep going, and some restriction related to the civic space for civil society and independent body also very limited for them to conduct or implement any activity. And in 2018, the CPP also like they secure 125 National Assembly seats, but as Cambodia becomes the one-state party, so the election was destroyed. Even they do the formal election in 2018, but it has been destroyed, as we can see and notice from the independent and also especially the expert related to human rights. They found that we are not enjoy the fundamental freedom recently in Cambodia, because we can say it is the plural party in the paper, but the reality is not. It's only one party recently in Cambodia. And in February 2019 and 2020, we noticed related to EBA trade scam that the EU also noticed and withdrawal the 20% of EBA reduction from Cambodia. So it is one sign that the person who really the victim is the vulnerable, and especially the Cambodian people, not the government, but it is to notice to the world, also the international, to be keep your eye watch and also keep pushing for the better world, especially related to human rights and democracy around the world. And also the GSP, the senator, the U.S. senator also stressed related to concerning about the human rights and democracy in Cambodia, and they set up the law related to this in order to make sure that Cambodia try to respect the democracy and also the human rights in our country, but the government failed to commit to be better on that. And as the COVID-19 is the global pandemic in the early 2020, which all around the world are affected. But in the Cambodian situation, they set up the COVID-19 law and also take this opportunity to crack down again the political activists as well as the human rights defender and also the person who dare to express their right or to share the information through the media, which is affected the government or also not really follow what the government wants. They are threatened and also arrested by using this law or using this term to arrest and to limit their freedom exercise of expression. And they also set up the state emergency law in April 2020, and this even give the authority to further power to suppress and exercise the human rights, especially the human rights defender in Cambodia. And they also have the draft law related to the public order and the sub-decree on the establishment of the National Internet Gateway and the cybercrime law. So all this law that they set up is even further danger for the human rights and fundamental freedom in Cambodia. And the third part, I would like to share some concern which is from Cambodian side. So from ADHOC side, we still remain seriously concerned about the human rights situation and also the regression of democracy in our country. And also regarding to the upcoming commune election in June next month, 2022, and also the national election is coming next year, 2023. We do not anti-participate, and they will the constitution free or not free and fair election. So is no multi-party can be participate equally in the line with the principle of democracy. And also some notice from the UN Special Rapporteur is also concerned about the election environment in 2022 and 2023, which may take place without the existing of available or any independent or opposition party. So it is also their concern. And related to online criticism of the royal government of Cambodia related to COVID-19 response, they lead to arrest and prosecution with the opposition or dismissed voice, frequently subject to the pre-trial detention and also imprisonment and also forced into exile. And another concern related to like the human rights defender, the government critic political opposition is continue to be harassed and arbitrarily detained. So three of ADHOC staff and 2 former of ADHOC staff still keep harassing by the court, and even now they are in the situation is still like they keep going with the court process by sending a letter, questioning, asking, and sweat. So recently, it's the big concern for human rights defender and for the political party and also the person who are interested with the anti party. So they are always harassed by the government. And the last part for the recommendation, ADHOC and the civil society at the beginning, we don't want to join or endorse the NHRIs, the National Human Rights. So this part we does not want to join because we didn't see any independent space for this body, but we will consider for the consultation after the election, after the commune election or national election. So this recommendation, it should be very closely monitored by the international as well. And another recommendation, we would like to request to all detained activists, government critics and political opponents should be immediately and also unconditionally released with full reinstatement of their political right. We further implore the authority to end all acts of harass against them and their family members. So we urge this for not only the politician activists, but also their family, because their family outside the prison and their children as well. So they should not harass or threat or follow by the authority. And also the signatories to the Paris Court Agreement, Paris Peace Agreement, Paris Peace Accord should appeal to the royal governments to respect the human rights and implement the principle of the Peace Accord and the international declaration. So all the international declaration they should that the Cambodian government have been signed or ratified, they should be respect and follow, especially related to Paris Peace Accords. That some countries are the party who sign and also to accept this. So they should be pushed for implementation and pushed to follow this. And another recommendation, we urge to drop all politically motivated charge against civil society figure and grant political rights to all opposition politicians without discrimination. And CSO should be like permitted to gather and join coalition with one another without legal constraint. So we recommend this because recently even the CSO activity, we are work independently, we are work for the vulnerable group, we are work to protect the victim, but we still we still harassed by the government by using the court and using the authority to follow us all the activity and also like taking photo of all our activity and follow some activity very closely as well. And the last recommendation, we want to ensure that all the independent media outlets are able to apply for and receive the license to open their office and also studio in Cambodia. As you may know that some independent media are not allowed and even they shut down the office and not allowed to have a license in Cambodia. So for this, it is all for my presentation, and make it short because I hope to welcome for some question and also sharing from all participants here, and thank you for the organization preparation team and also the organizer here. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 큰 박수 부탁드립니다. 사실 캄보디아가 한국 언론에서 많이 관심을 못 받고는 있지만 계속해서 참 많은 악법들도 통과되고 또 사실상 아까도 발제해서 일당 독재가 지금 되고 있다는 곳이어서 굉장히 심각합니다. 근데 문제는 바로 이 캄보디아가 현재 아세안 의장 국가를 맡고 있는 또 그런 현실이 이제 앞으로 이제 바로 발제하실 우리 이상국 교수님의 미얀마 관련돼서도 연결이 되는 것 같습니다. 네, 다음 순서는 이상국 연세대학교 교수님께서 미얀마 민주주의 재건설의 도전과 과제라는 주제로 발표해 주시도록 하겠습니다. 교수님 15분 시간 부탁드리겠습니다.
네, 반갑습니다. 발표 시작하겠습니다. 미얀마 군부 쿠데타와 그 이후 전개된 사태는 우리에게 미얀마 민주주의가 취약했다는 것을 새삼 일깨워줍니다. 두 가지 점에서 그 취약성이 드러나는데, 하나는 군부로 대표되는 물리적 폭력에 대한 취약성이고, 다른 하나는 다수의 횡포, 소수자 배제의 취약성입니다. 군부 쿠데타가 발생하기까지 우리는 그 취약성을 심각하게 생각하지 않았던 것 같습니다. 10년의 실험 동안 우리는 겉으로 드러난 환상에 현혹되었던 것 같습니다. 다수의 횡포, 소수자 배제의 취약성이 터져나와도 우리는 미얀마 민주주의가 전진하고 있다고 믿었던 것 같습니다. 군부 쿠데타는 우리의 믿음이 허망이었음을 드러냈습니다. 그 10년의 민주주의 실험은 파국을 맞이했습니다. 우리는 이제 그 폐허 위에서 미얀마 민주주의를 제대로 세우는 과업을 수행하고 있습니다. 미얀마 민주주의 재건설의 과업은 그 두 가지 취약성을 극복하는 방향에서 전개되고 있습니다. 폭력적인 군부에 대응해서 시민 방위군을 조직하고 무장투쟁을 전개하고 있습니다. 쿠데타 이후 청년세대가 중심이 된 시민 불복종 운동이 민족통합정부 NUG가 2021년 5월 5일에 조직한 시민 방위군의 무장 형태로 이어지고 있습니다. NUG는 작년 9월 7일에 군부에 전쟁을 선포하기까지도 했죠. 시민 방위군은 탄마도에 결연히 맞서는 한편 민간의 지배를 받고 국민을 보호하는 진정한 군대가 되려고 의지를 밝히고 있습니다. 그리고 소수종족 무장 세력과도 연대해서 주요 요충지에서 전투를 벌이고 있습니다. 그런데 이러한 무장 투쟁은 우리에게 참 난처한 질문을 던집니다. 민주주의 재건설 과정에서 폭력 투쟁은 낭만적인 수사에 불과한가? 무장투쟁은 탄마도를 실질적으로 퇴진시킬 수 있는 유력한 방식인가? 이 질문에 답하기란 쉽지 않습니다. 지금까지 1,700명이 희생을 당한 사실, 그 중에는 130여 명의 어린이들도 포함되는 사실, 그리고 13,000명이 체포되고 55만 명이 터전을 잃고 5만 명의 난민이 발생한 사실 앞에 감히 비폭력 투쟁을 계속하라고 주장하겠습니까? 두 번째, 다수의 횡포를 제어하지 못했던 취약성에 대한 극복은 성찰과 연대의 정신 아래 전개되고 있습니다. 그 구심점은 범민주세력의 연합체인 민족통합협상위원회, NUCC인데 여기에 NUG, CRPH, 그다음에 소수종족 무장세력, 노조, 정당, 시민사회가 참여하고 있습니다. 연대가 구성되었던 과정은 다음과 같습니다. 작년 2월 그 전년도 11월 총선을 통해서 선출된 NLD 의원들이 중심이 되어 CRPH를 구성합니다. 그와 동시에 3월 8일에는 국민주 세력이 연합해서 NUCC를 조직합니다. NUCC의 협의를 거쳐서 3월 31일 CRPH는 군부가 좋아요 제정한 2008년 헌법을 폐지한다는 선언과 함께 연방민주주의 임시헌법을 발표합니다. 이 헌법에 기초해서 임시정부를 할 수 있는 NUG가 4월 16일에 구성됩니다. 임시헌법에는 연방민주주의 건설을 핵심 목표로 담고 있습니다. NUCC가 중심이 되어서 그간 NLD 정부에서조차도 소홀히 했던 소수종족의 권리에 대한 인정을 임시헌법에 담았습니다. 예컨대 소수종족 언어를 공용어로 인정한다는 조항이 담겨 있습니다. NUG는 로힝자 사태에 대한 반성과 더불어 더 공존하는 방법을 천명하기로 했습니다. 그러나 여전히 NUG 내는 물론 NUCC 내에서도 로힝자 당사자와 실질적인 협력이 이루어지지 않고 있다는 점, 그리고 일부 소수종족은 여전히 NUCC와 거리를 두고 있다는 점, 또한 이익 세력이 된 일부 소수종족 군부를 통제하기 어렵다는 점 등은 숙제라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 사실 다수 대표자의 근간을 둔 미얀마의 민주주의가 로힝자 학살을 부추긴 점을 부인할 수 없습니다. NUCC의 소수자 연대 모습은 미얀마 차원뿐만 아니라 온 세계에 닥치고 있는 포퓰리즘과 혐오의 정치를 극복하는 모델이 될 수 있겠습니다. 그렇게 하기 위해서 좀 더 담대한 모델, 현재 논의되고 있는 연방제와 국가연합 모델까지도 넘어서는 뭔가 혁신적인 거버넌스 체계를 상상하고 실현할 수 있기를 기대합니다. 이것이 제가 이 회에서 포럼거리로 제시하고 싶은 안건이기도 합니다. 여기서 한 가지 아이러니는 군부가 다수 대표제를 막을 방도를 찾고 있다는 것입니다. 소수 세력 보호라는 명분이 엉뚱하게 전유되고 있는 것이죠. 쿠데타 장본인인 민 아웅훌라이는 작년 8월 1일 과도 정부의 수당으로 취임하면서 2023년 8월에 선거가 치러질 것이라고 언급을 했습니다. 그러면서 다수대표제의 폐단을 시정하는 차원에서 다당제 비례대표제 쪽으로 선거법을 고칠 뜻을 내비쳤습니다. 쿠데타를 일으킬 당시에는 1년 뒤에 물러나겠다고 했는데 그 약속을 번복해서 1년 더 늘린 것이죠. 그러나 이것은 익숙한 셈법입니다. 1988년 항쟁을 진압하며 등장한 신군부는 1990년 NLD의 대승으로 끝난 선거 결과를 뒤집으면서 헌법을 기초한다는 작업을 한다는 명목으로 군부 주도 아래 국민회의를 구성하여 철저하게 군부의 이익을 보장하는 방식, 즉 의회의 25%를 군에 할당하고 내무부, 국경부 등 주요 부처는 군부가 장관을 맡고 2008년에 헌법을 제정하고 2010년 10월에 선거를 치렀습니다. 1988년 쿠데타 이후 거의 20년 동안 신헌법을 기초한다는 명목으로 시간을 끌면서 통치를 해온 것입니다. 이번에도 비슷한 상황이 전개될지 모르겠습니다. 여러 의견을 모은다는 핑계로 헌법 개정 결정을 마냥 지연시키며 군부 통치를 이어나갈 가능성이 있습니다. 설령 약속대로 2023년 8월에 선거가 치러지더라도 2025년과 2020년 선거 패배의 학습 효과로 NLD의 독점을 막고 군부 후원 정당의 이익을 상당하게 보장하는 방식으로 선거법과 헌법을 개정할 가능성이 큽니다. 군부가 다수 대표제 폐단을 시정하고 나서는 상황은 역사의 희극이라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 한편 이것은 군부가 실제로 민심을 잃어서 적어도 선거라는 제도에서 소수자로 전락했다는 것을 드러냅니다. 2021년 2월 쿠데타는 몰락한 군대가 다른 게임을 만들어서 자기 존재를 회복시키려는 발로라고 해석할 수 있겠습니다. 저는 군부가 뭔가 믿는 구석이 있어서 쿠데타를 일으켰다고 생각합니다. 바로 그 믿는 구석이랑 바로 나라를 구한다는 정당성이라고 생각을 합니다. 특히 원심력이 강했던 초기 탈식민 국민국가 건설 과정에서 그 정당성에 기대어서 군부는 정치에 개입을 했습니다. 그러나 군부가 깨닫지 못한 점은 정당성은 화석과 같은 것이 아니라 시대에 따라서 새롭게 구성된다는 점입니다. 저마다의 시대는 저마다의 과제를 안고 있으며 그 과제를 해결해 나가는 과정에서 정당성을 확보해 나간다는 점을 과거의 시대와 계속 발을 딛고 있는 것이죠. 특히 2000년대 이후 정보통신혁명이 불러일으킨 새로운 문화 기운의 세례를 받으며 자유의 맛을 보고 성장한 세대들에게는 군부 쿠데타는 도저히 용납할 수 없는 폭포였습니다. 그렇게 시대의 흐름에 맞추지 못한 군부는 미얀마의 앞길을 방해하며 현 시대 통치의 정당성을 상실한 살아있는 과거의 유물이 되어버렸습니다. 남은 것이라곤 원초적 힘에 의지하는 것인데 그 끔찍한 폐해를 우리는 목도하고 있습니다. 또 하나 군부가 쿠데타를 일으키고 게임을 바꾸려고 한 것은 이 국가가 전례를 제공했기 때문일 것입니다. 태국 군부는 2014년 5월에 정정한 해소를 이유로 쿠데타를 일으키고 철저하게 군부의 이익을 관철하는 방향으로 선거를 치렀습니다. 그 결과 육군 총사령관 출신 브라이어 찬로차가 총리가 되었습니다. 정도와 방식이 다를 뿐 아세안에서 어느 한 나라 떳떳하게 민주주의를 실현하고 있다고 내세우기 힘듭니다. 그럼에도 아세안이 2021년 4월에 미낭 훌라잉을 불러서 5가지 사항에 대해 합의를 이뤄낼 때 아세안의 결기가 느껴졌습니다. 특히 인도네시아, 말레이시아, 싱가포르는 미얀마 군부에 대해 단호한 태도를 견지했습니다. 그 합의안이 제대로 이행되지 않자 아세안은 2021년 10월 아세안 정상회의에서 군부 참석을 배제했습니다. 또 11월 아세안 중국 정상회의, 12월 아시아 유럽 정상회의에서도 군부는 초청받지 못했습니다. 그러나 올해 2022년 캄보디아가 아세안 의장국을 맡게 되자 상황이 돌변했습니다. 캄보디아 훈센 총리는 의장 자격으로 1월 7일 미얀마를 방문해서 미낭 훌라잉을 만났습니다. 훈사는 아세안 정상들 중 쿠데타 이후 처음 미얀마를 방문한 인사였습니다. 미낭 훌라잉은 훈센에게 5가지 합의사항을 이행하겠다고 밝히면서 그 하나로서 소수종족 세력에게 휴전, 그리고 정전을 제안했다고 언급하기도 했습니다. 훈센은 내전에 빠졌던 캄보디아의 화해와 평화의 이행 과정에 대한 경험을 당사자로서 민 아웅 훌라잉과 공유했습니다. 훈센은 캄보디아의 근현대사를 압축적으로 체화하고 있는 당사자로서 동병상련을 앓고 있는 미얀마를 남다르게 생각할 수 있습니다. 그러나 그 자신, 캄보디아의 현 민주주의를 질곡에 빠뜨리고 있는 당사자로서 미얀마의 민주적 가치를 전수한다는 것은 얼토당토 않는 것입니다. 오히려 훈센의 방문은 아세안이 작년의 결기와는 다르게 미얀마 군부를 파트너로 인정한다는 인식을 외부에 심어주었습니다. 더군다나 합의사항에 모든 당사자를 대화 상대자로 포함했음에도 군부는 훈센이 아웅산수치 등 NUG 인사를 만나는 것을 허용하지 않았습니다. 훈센은 미낭 훌라잉이 허용한 무대에서만 반쪽짜리 역할을 수행했습니다. 그리고 올해 3월 21일, 23일에는 5가지 합의사항의 하나인 아세안 특사단의 방문이 이루어졌습니다. 특사는 다름 아닌 훈센 정부의 외교장관을 맡고 있는 프락소콘이었습니다. 아세안 특사단은 다름 아닌 캄보디아 특사단, 아니 훈센의 특사단이었습니다. 아세안 특사단 역시 이번에도 군부가 허락하지 않아서 NUG 인사를 만나지 못했고 소수종족 세력도 만나지 못했습니다. 미얀마 사태는 작년까지만 해도 아세안 회원국들에게 민주주의에 대한 각성을 불러일으키고 그런 내정 불가사 또는 건설적 개입이라는 명분으로 회원국의 반민주적 작대에 눈감았던 행태를 돌이킬 수 있는 계기로 전환될 수 있었는데 올해의 행보로 보아서는 그것을 기대하기가 힘들 것 같습니다. 여기에 우리가 이 회의에서 다룰 또 다른 의제를 도출할 수 있겠습니다. 영내외 시민사회는 어떻게 아세안을 영내 민주주의를 책임지는 당사자로 변모시킬 수 있을 것입니다. 우리는 어떻게 아세안을 넘어서서 영내 민주주의를 도모할 수 있을 것인가. 여기서 국제사회로 눈을 돌려볼 필요가 있겠습니다. 우선 유엔의 대응을 살펴보겠습니다. 유엔은 미얀마 군부의 반대를 무릅쓰며 NLD 정부 시절에 임명된 쪼모툰 유엔 대표부 대사를 계속 인정하면서 한편으로 군부가 임명한 대사의 심장을 수용하지 않고 있습니다. 물론 중국 등의 반대로 쪼모툰 대사가 유엔 총회에서 미얀마를 대표하여 연설하는 기회는 주어지지 않고 있습니다. 유엔이 여러 한계점을 갖고 있음에도 쪼모툰 대사의 위임 그 자체는 국제사회가 군부에게 설 자리를 제공해 주지 않은 상징적 조치라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 미국 역시 미얀마에 대해 단호한 입장을 보이고 있습니다. 아마 5월에 미국 아세안 특별정상회의가 개최될 텐데 미얀마 군부는 초청받지 못했습니다. 유럽의 대응도 흥미롭습니다. 프랑스 상원은 작년 10월 5일에 만장일치로 NUG를 미얀마의 공식 정부로 승인했습니다. 유럽 의회에서도 10월 7일 NUG를 미얀마의 대표로 인정하는 결의안을 채택했습니다. 한국을 비롯해서 여러 나라들이 NUG를 인정하라는 요구를 시민사회로부터 받고 있습니다. 각국 정부 차원에서 선뜻 NUG를 공식 정부로 인정하기란 쉽지 않을 것입니다. 그럼에도 한국을 비롯한 여러 나라들이 군부에 대해 단호한을 견지하고 또 각국 거주 미얀마 이민자들의 비자를 연장해두고 NUG 인사들의 활동에 직간접 편의를 제공하는 연대 정신의 발현이라고 평가할 수 있겠습니다. 한국 시민단체들은 쿠데타 발발 1주기를 맞이해서 미얀마 민주주의 투쟁에 계속 연대할 것임을 밝혔습니다. 한국 시민사회는 2000년대 초반부터 미얀마 활동가와 연대하면서 민주주의 투쟁을 지지해 왔습니다. 그 둘의 연대에서 광주 정신이 핵심 가치였습니다. 광주 정신은 그 둘의 연대를 기름돌 삼아서 아시아로 지경을 넓혔고 보편적 인권의 기치로 승화됐습니다. 10년의 미얀마 민주주의 실험 과정 중 로힝자 사태를 겪으면서 그 둘의 연대가 잠시 어긋나기도 했지만 광주 정신을 되새기며 미얀마 민주주의 재건의 길로 함께 나갑니다. 저는 이 재건의 길에서 전혀 다른 상상력을 발휘하면서 새로운 방법을 모색해 보길 기대합니다. 제가 토론거리로 제시한 두 가지를 다시 꺼내보겠습니다. 하나는 연방제와 국가연합 모델까지도 넘어서는 혁신적인 거버넌스 체계에 관한 모색이었고, 다른 하나는 아세안을 변화시키거나 그것을 넘어서 영내 민주주의를 도모하는 방법에 관한 모색입니다. 이 모색이 이번 세션과 다음 분과 세션을 통해서 활발하게 이루어지기를 기대하겠습니다. 이상 마치겠습니다.
예, 교수님 감사합니다. 이 세션에서 토론할 거리로 그 가버넌스에 대한 문제, 하나는 미얀마의 지금 다양한 소수민족이나 이런 부분들을 해결 방식으로서의 새로운 어떤 국가 가버넌스 체계, 또 하나는 아세안에 대한 또 아세안의 한계를 넘어서는 가버넌스 체계에 대한 그 제안을 주셨습니다. 이후 미얀마 분과 세션에서 이 교수님께서 주신 제안도 같이 논의되면 좋을 것 같습니다. 다음은 오늘 이제 마지막 발제입니다. 최근에 있었던 이제 필리핀 선거가 있었는데요. 저는 정말 이렇게 그 아시아 각국의 친구들이 어느 시점이 지나면 다 같이 페이스북 프로필이 다 검은색으로 바뀌는 장면을 주기적으로 계속 보고 있는데, 또 최근에는 우리 필리핀 친구들이 5월 9일 이후에 페이스북 프로필이 다 검은색으로 바뀌는 장면을 보고 또 마음이 참 안 좋았습니다. 이 발표는 조한나 까리뇨 선생님이 해주실 텐데요. 조한나 선생님은 2019년도에 광주 인권상 수상자이시기도 합니다. 네, 독재자의 아들 그리고 현도 스트롱맨의 딸이 집권한 필리핀의 전망이 어떻게 될지 우리 조한나 선생님 모시고 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 박수로 환영해 주십시오.
Okay. Yes, good afternoon to all of us here in this virtual session on Prospects for Democracy in Asia. So I am Joanna Carino. I am an indigenous activist from the Philippines and the 2019 laureate of the Gwangju Prize for Human Rights, and I would like to share my views on the recent elections in the Philippines. So national elections in the Philippines were held just a few days ago, last week on May 9, 2022. And the son and namesake of the former Philippine dictator, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., and his running mate, Sara Duterte, the daughter of the outgoing authoritarian president, have incredibly won the elections. An astounded world that celebrated with us the Filipino People Power Democratic Uprising, which ousted the dictator in 1986, is now asking, how could this happen? Have the Filipino people really forgotten the 70,000 people imprisoned, 34,000 tortured, and 3,240 extrajudicially killed during Marcos martial law? Have the Filipino people really forgotten the $10 billion stolen wealth and the bloated foreign debt, the burden of which Filipino taxpayers are still paying up to the present? It will be recalled that the former Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos was ousted from the Philippines in an amazing display of people power in February 1986, after 14 years of brutal dictatorship and plunder of more than $10 million from the nation's coffers. The Marcos conjugal dictatorship involved the whole family, including the son and namesake, who has now won the Philippine presidency. Marcos Jr. was conscripted as an officer of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. He was appointed as director of the Philippine Communications and Satellite Commission and was made vice governor, then governor of their home province, Ilocos Norte. He cannot wash his hands of the crimes against the Filipino people committed by the Marcos dictatorship, for which he has never shown any remorse nor made an apology. The explanation to that mystery of seeming historical amnesia is the failure of the Philippine educational system after people power in 1986 to teach the whole truth about martial law. It is certainly a question why the Corazon Aquino government, which was installed through people power and was a revolutionary government to start with, was unable to institutionalize the teaching about Marcos martial law and the people power democratic uprising. The other succeeding regimes after her also failed to do so, although her son, Benigno Noynoy Aquino III, during his presidency, did approve the passage of Republic Act 10368, the law providing for reparation and recognition of victims of human rights violations during the Marcos regime, whereby some 10,000 plus victims of martial law, including myself, received indemnification from the government. There is a scarcity of available factual and truthful material about Marcos martial law. The truth can be found only in not so accessible institutions, such as the Monument of Heroes or Bantayog ng mga Bayani, or in the very limited martial law museums and published material. Progressive academics at the university level do try to teach about Marcos martial law, but the audience is limited only to their students and has not reached the wider public. While the 1986 democratic uprising ousted a dictator, it did not result in the much-needed structural changes in Philippine society. Many of the Marcos cronies and oligarchies were able to remain or return to power in the succeeding years. The human rights violators in the police and military were not prosecuted, but allowed to stay. Democratic socio-economic reforms, such as land reform and nationalist industrialization, were not instituted to improve the plight of the poor, landless, and unemployed who compose the majority of the Philippine population. Thus, while democratic space was temporarily restored in 1986, the economic crisis continued and has worsened through the years. The same oligarchies and dynasty families continue to control political power, leading many Filipinos to believe that not much has changed even after the people power democratic uprising. Each generation learns about their nation's history from basic education through official curriculum, which should be taught in all of the schools. Absent the systematic teaching of knowledge about Marcos martial law in the Philippine educational system, succeeding generations have not been provided with the necessary grounding on that dark period in our nation's history. They were thus vulnerable to the historical distortions, myths, and lies that were systematically programmed to rebrand and rehabilitate the image of the Marcoses and martial law in their bid to return to power since as early as 2014. The Marcos family used their stolen wealth to employ an army of trolls to spread lies, myths, distortions, and false news about Marcos martial law. They created and published disinformation, especially on social media. Thousands of troll accounts on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok churned out expensive and well-crafted videos extolling martial law as a golden age. During the campaign period, this troll army was used to relentlessly attack the opposition. 2021 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, has spoken about the insidious influence that the social media giants have allowed to flourish in their platforms by allowing the revision of history on social media before our very eyes. Recent studies by Avas have shown that these mega technology platforms are a threat to democracy in that they are able to spread hate and disinformation as to be able to actually influence the outcome of elections. In the European Union, officials and lawmakers have recently passed the Digital Services Act, a historic law that holds social media platforms accountable for the harms caused by their toxic algorithms. President Rodrigo Duterte himself was party to historical revisionism when he announced early in his presidency that Marcos was his idol and allowed his burial in the Heroes Cemetery. The president has even made statements that the stolen wealth was never proven, in contradiction to the fact that the Philippine government has been trying to recover the stolen loot, but only a fraction has been recovered so far. The Marcos Duterte campaign relied heavily on their almost unlimited resources from the Marcos ill-gotten wealth and Duterte's control of the government. They distributed campaign funds to get the support of many local officials. There have been reports of vote buying in their campaign sorties. Both of them refused to participate in any of the presidential and vice presidential debates, and therefore have not presented any comprehensive program of governance to the people. Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. and Sara Duterte have announced that they plan to continue with both of their fathers' authoritarian rule. they have been able to take advantage of the chronic crisis of Philippine society and disillusionment of the people with government to promise strongman rule as the solution. Already, the presumptive president has announced that the vice president will head the Department of Education. This will only compound the failure of the educational system to institutionalize martial law and human rights education. Educators are afraid that what might get institutionalized is historical revisionism instead. Both have signified their support for the continuance of the dreaded National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, which has been the cause of so many human rights violations against civilians, such as extrajudicial killings, weaponizing the law with the filing of numerous trumped-up charges, torture, indiscriminate bombing and forced evacuations during the military operations, and vicious red tagging and terrorist labeling against all critics of the Duterte regime. The draconian anti-terror law of 2020 is now in effect, under which the Anti-Terrorism Council can declare anyone as a terrorist and throw them in jail without charges for as long as 24 days. It is to be expected that with them in power, the Philippine government will refuse to cooperate with the International Criminal Court's investigation into the charges of crimes against humanity committed by the Duterte regime in his war on drugs and war on terror to allow the father to escape accountability. Character of Philippine elections. Elections in the Philippines has been characterized as being determined by guns, goons, and gold. Powerful political dynasties continue to use their huge resources and authority to maintain themselves in power from one election to the next. Spouses, siblings, and children just replace incumbents when it is their time to go, as shown by the Duterte-Marcos tandem, now poised to assume power. Even the party list system, which was intended to give voice to the marginalized and unrepresented sectors of society, has been co-opted by dynasty families. They find this as a convenient means to buy their way to more seats in Congress. Electoral reform is badly needed to enforce the constitutional ban on political dynasties and bring the party list system back to its original intent. Serious questions have been raised regarding the independence of the Commission on Elections. The 7 persons who make up the Commission are all Duterte appointees. The Commission and Bank did not act speedily on the cases for disqualification of Marcos Jr. from the presidential race, having been convicted for tax evasion, which should have permanently disqualified him from running for public office. The COMELEC released their decision to uphold his candidacy only after Election Day. Petitioners have now filed petition for certiorari at the Supreme Court on the COMELEC decision that should have been made way before Election Day, having such a profound significance on Marcos Jr.'s qualifications for the presidency. Election Day was marred by numerous irregularities, like vote buying, disenfranchisement of voters, breakdown of vote counting machines, power failures, massive disinformation in social media, red tagging, and violence, which should all be investigated. Many continue to be suspicious of the possibility of widespread cheating in the national elections, through the automated electoral system, and would want to return to the system of manual voting. Elections has always been touted as an institutional cornerstone of democracy, but only if you have an even playing field and equal opportunities for all. elections in the Philippines has only proven our flawed democracy. The opposition. The strongest opposition to the Marcos Duterte tandem was the team of Vice President Leni Robredo for President and Senator Kiko Pangilinan for Vice President. Although they lost the vote, they were able to inspire millions of Filipinos in the struggle for truth and good governance. The Leni Kiko campaign was able to unite a wide array of political forces of all colors and drew endorsements from a wide number of groups and social influencers. Among them, the schools, churches, artists, party lists, professionals, business, workers, peasants, women, indigenous peoples, Moro people, the youth. Their campaign rallies drew huge numbers of people, the largest of which was estimated at more than 500,000. The Leni Kiko campaign transformed into a people's campaign, reminiscent of the people power which ousted the Marcos dictatorship in 1986. There was a very high level of solidarity and volunteerism in the campaign, with supporters giving freely of their time, efforts, and resources. Among the most active volunteers were thousands of Filipino youth, brimming with idealism, enthusiasm, and creativity. The People's Campaign tried mightily to counter the lies and disinformation of the Marcos Duterte camp and waged a truth campaign against historical revisionism. But there was not enough time to correct all of the lies and distortions which have been spread through social media for decades. When the initial results of the voting were announced to indicate a Marcos Duterte landslide victory, there was disbelief, grief, rage, anxiety, and intense disappointment among the volunteers of the People's Campaign, especially among the youth and martial law survivors such as myself. Many got so demoralized that psychosocial processes were needed and are still ongoing. There have been daily protests in many parts of the country rejecting a Marcos Duterte leadership. Such deep solidarity was built among the volunteers of the People's Campaign that they have vowed to continue working together even after elections. The Leni Kiko team recently announced in their Thanksgiving rally, attended by thousands, that the results of the elections was not the end, and this was only the beginning of the next stage in the transformed people's movement for truth and good governance. In summary, the Marcos Duterte victory is the result of years of massive disinformation, historical distortion, and false narratives, systematic and state-sponsored vilification and repression of the opposition and administration critics, and an electoral system dominated by political dynasties and characterized by massive vote buying and other forms of cheating and irregularities. The winning team will likely continue with the authoritarian rule of their fathers. This does not bode well for human rights, peace, and democracy in the Philippines. Truly, human rights defenders in the Philippines are up for hard times in the years ahead under a Marcos Duterte administration. On the other hand, the opposition campaign has lit a flame that ignited a yearning for change among millions of Filipinos, and thus has arisen a people's movement for truth, justice, accountability, and good governance. Leni Robredo has said that this will be the biggest volunteer organization that the Philippines has ever seen. And we will march into the future with hope and determination to transform ourselves and our fellow citizens, to tirelessly build a Philippine society where human rights will be respected and justice, peace, and democracy will reign supreme. Thank you. Good afternoon.
예, 감사합니다. 네, 조한나 선생님 계속 건강하시고 또 계속해서 이렇게 활동해 나실 것 같은데 부디 필리핀에서 지금 다시 민주주의가 올 때까지 건강하셨으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 그 5분의 발제를 다 이제 마쳤습니다. 이제 그 토론이 있을 텐데요. 그 발제하신 선생님들 상호간에 하셔도 좋고 또 지금 참가하고 계시는 분들께서도 질문 있으시면 비디오를 켜시고 말씀해 주시거나 아니면 채팅창에 올려주시면 제가 또 전달을 하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 혹시 뭐 질문이나 뭐 코멘트 혹시 있으실까요? 예, 생각하시는 동안 네, 이번 필리핀 대선에서도 네, 그 K-팝 팬들이 그 레니 후보를 굉장히 적극적으로 지지해서 또 한국에서도 화제가 됐었습니다. 2020년 태국 시위 때도 K-팝 팬들의 또 적극적인 시위 참여가 있었었고요. 네, 물론 당연히 미얀마 그 민주 흥쟁 과정에서도 상당히 많은 미얀마의 젊은 세대들이 또 K-팝 팬이어서 또 화제가 된 바도 있습니다. 그래서 사실 지금 아시아에서 벌어지고 있는 많은 문제들은 단순히 정치적인 문제뿐만이 아니라 굉장히 이런 문화적인 면, 또 경제적인 면, 많은 면에서 한국과 밀접한 연관을 맺고 있습니다. 그래서 우리가 더 많은 관심, 또 관심뿐만이 아니라 한국 사회가 이런 아시아의 민주주의에 대해서 어떻게 연대하고 또 우리가 기여할 수 있을까에 대한 그런 고민들이 또 계속해서 필요한 것이 아닐까 그런 생각이 듭니다. 혹시 질문이나 토론 없으실까요? 물론 그 미얀마 그리고 캄보디아, 태국 같은 경우에는 잠시 후 4시부터 별도로 온라인과 또 현장에서 그 토론이 진행될 예정입니다. 그런데 이제 홍콩이랑 필리핀 같은 경우에는 이제 이후 별도 세션이 없기 때문에 만약에 질문이 있으시다면 가급적 홍콩이랑 필리핀에 해주시면 더 감사하겠습니다. 네, 홍콩 발표자분께 질문이 있습니다. 많은 NGO가 해산되고 있는 현재 개별적으로 활동하게 된 활동가들은 어떻게 연대를 모색하고 있는지 궁금합니다. 그리고 새로운 행정장관이 선출되었는데 경찰 출신한 점에서 우려가 큰 듯합니다. 새로운 행정장관 선출 이후 홍콩 시민사회가 더욱 염려하고 있는 지점은 무엇인지 궁금합니다. 네, 에릭. Could you answer?
Yes,
now?
I get the question, so perhaps I can answer a bit. Thank you for your question. These are very important questions indeed. For civil society, it is true that many civil society organizations are now disbanded, and many activists are now either in jail or they are exiled from Hong Kong to many places, or they are remain in Hong Kong in a very low profile to avoid being arrested or being monitored by the National Security Police. So to continue their advocacy work, they are finding creative ways to connect with the local people. So first of all, activists who are still in Hong Kong, they are working underground and they are focusing more on social and economic inequalities and discrimination issues like gender, ethnic discriminations, gender discriminations, and LGBT rights. The government in Hong Kong is not yet sweeping out these activities, but we worry they would. But at this moment, I guess this is also a good contact point, because although the major political and liberal democratic issues cannot be publicly discussed now, but social justice, economic justice, equality issues are still important, are still able to be discussed in Hong Kong society. So this may be rooms for activists to continue their work and to connect with the people. But of course, second, there are many activists who are now no longer in Hong Kong, and many of them have ties with you, have ties with international trade unions or international human rights NGOs. So they are now in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in the United States or Australia, or some of them are in Korea, because Seoul is an important hub for many INGOs, international NGOs. So these would be opportunities for us, even though we are not inside Hong Kong, to continue our dialogue and to exchange for what we can be support each other. Like what you said, not just on political campaign, but also on cultural and everyday dialogue and exchange. And I have to say, many Hong Kong activists and many Hong Kong people are very fascinated by K-pop, by Korean dramas, and as well as by the Korean history of social movement. And the candlelight assemblies and the trade union protests in Korea were so inspiring to many people in Hong Kong. And to the second question on the new administration, the upcoming new chief executive, the city Hong Kong's mayor, John Lee, he has a strong police background. He was one of the leaders in the police force and the head of the security department in Hong Kong. So he is a guy to do national security. And he has already indicated that national security will be his priority. But we all know national security is an excuse. It's more about repression on anti-government activities and anti-government groups in Hong Kong. So that would be very challenging, and particularly people are now focusing on freedom of religion in Hong Kong. Mainly because Cardinal Sen, as I said in my presentation, a very pro-democratic Catholic cardinal, he got arrested. He will appear in court in May for a minor offense, but in August, he will report to the police on bail about his national security crimes. So, and at the same time, many local Christian churches, including the Catholic Church, people were worried that they will be further controlled by the government, by law, by regulations. And they worry they will be like in the mainland China. And religious Christian churches in Hong Kong were supportive for pro-democracy movement for many decades, and they provide many humanitarian support as well as social support, social justice assistance to civil society for many decades as well. So I hope you can also continue to pay attention to what's going on in Hong Kong, particularly to civil society and to religious freedom, to free speech and free association in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. 네, 질문이
하나.
네.
누구야? 이상국 교수님이 발표하면서 토론거리로 두 가지를 제시를 했어요. 근데 그 부분은 이제 자세하게 설명하지 않고 그냥 넘어가신 것 같아서 그 부분을 좀만 더 설명을 한번 해주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
예, 제가 두 가지 수론거리를 제시를 했죠. 하나는 연방제와 국가연합 모델까지도 넘어서는 혁신적인 거버넌스 체계에 관한 것이었고, 다른 하나는 아세안을 넘어서는 것이었죠. 근데 제 발표문의 부제에서 제가 그걸 드러내기도 했죠. 국가체계와 아세안을 넘어서자라는 부제를 붙였죠. 첫 번째 것부터 살펴보면 사실 지금까지 연방제를 중심으로 소수민족 문제를 풀려고 하는 시도가 있어 왔죠. 한계가 있었지만 헌법도 이제 그런 방식으로 군부가 주도했지만 소수자를 아우르는 방식으로 흉내를 내면서 사실 개정을 해왔고, 또 뭐 NLD도 뭐 한계는 있었죠. 또 어떤 목표, 그런 목표는 내세웠던 것 같습니다. 그런데도 왜 이렇게 잘 안 될까? 왜 지금까지 거의 한 70년 가량 소수민족을 동반자로서 미얀마 연방 포함하려는 시도들이 왜 거듭거듭 실패를 하고 있을까? 저는 그 문제를 좀 근본적 다시 좀 생각해 봐야 한다. 이렇게 주장을 하고 싶은데요. 결국은 국가체계로서는 이 문제를 풀 수 없는 게 아니라, 국가체계라고 하면 뭐 연방제든 국가연합이든, 국가연합이 그래도 소수자의 권리를 최대한 보장하는 방식이죠. 국가들 사이에 뭐 연합이니까 거의 독립국가 수준으로 인정을 한다는 것인데, 사실 여전히 이제 국가 체계라는 점에서 연장선 보고 있어요. 그래서 그것까지도 넘어서는 혁신적인 거버넌스가 필요하지 않나 이런 생각이 들고요. 이건 상상의 차원입니다. 차원인데 그래도 상상해보는 게 좋을 것 같아요. 그래서 어떤 상상을 해볼 수 있냐면, 지금은 뭔가 영토를 갖고 있어야 국가로서 인정을 받게 되는데, 그 영토를 벗어난 어떤 시스템, 그런 시스템을 좀 생각해 보면 어떨까 이런 생각이 들고요. 그 다음 복수주권에 관한 문제인데, 복수주권이라고 하면 또 복수의 어떤 시민권, 성원권에 관한 문제인데요. 과감하게 개인한테 뭔가 결정권을 주는 방식으로 거버넌스 체계를 좀 구성해 가면 어떨까. 미얀마 안에서 그러니까 누구든지 복수의 구성권을 갖도록 하면은, 그래서 적어도 이 땅 내 땅, 그죠? 이 구획하려는 시도에서 벌어지는 그 충돌은 막을 수 있지 않을까, 이런 생각이 들어요. 그러니까 뭐 가상의 미얀마 국가가 있고, 또 가상의 뭐 카렌족 국가가 있고, 뭐 가상의 샨족, 까친족 국가가 있을 텐데, 과감하게 성원권을 자기가 결정하도록 하면은, 그러면서 뭔가 그런 복수의 성원권이 가능하도록 하는 거버넌스 체계를 구성해 나가면, 적어도 땅 문제로 인한 충돌은 피할 수 있지 않을까 이런 생각을 해보게 되고요. 그다음 좀 더 나아가서 굳이 미얀마에 있더라도, 설령 미얀마에 있더라도 어떤 유엔이 제시하는 성원권 또는 뭐 그런 성원권이 아직은 생각하기 어렵다면 뭐 한국이 주는 뭐 시민권 뭐 이것도 생각해 볼 수 있지 않을까 이런 생각을 해요. 왜냐하면 이게 전혀 상상의 차원이 아니라는 게 사실 우리가 데려오거든요. 편현적 난민을 데려왔어요. 태국 미얀마 난민촌에서 내려오고 그다음에 말레이시아에서 미얀마 난민을 데려왔어요. 한국뿐만 아니라 사실 대부분의 선진 국가들 미국, 호주, 캐나다, 유럽 국가들이 데려가거든요. 소위 재정착 난민 제도라는 포용 정책을 통해서 데려가요. 데려가서 시민 만들거든요. 데려가서 시민 만드는 게 어렵겠습니까? 아니면은 안 데려가고 그냥 시민권을 주는 것이 더 어렵겠습니까? 저는 데려가서 시민권 주는 게 더 어렵다고 보거든요. 후자가 쉬운 문제죠, 오히려. 그러니까 이 말의 핵심은 어떤 시민권, 성원권의 문제를 굳이 땅과 결부짓지 말자는 거죠. 미국에 가 있어야, 한국에 와 있어야 성원권을 주는 제도가 아니라 그냥 미얀마에 있어도 난민촌에 있어도 뭔가 성원권을 받을 수 있는 그런 시스템을 좀 만들어가면 어떨까. 상상의 차원입니다만은 이게 상상이 아니라는 게 사실 어려운 것도 하고 있는데 쉬운 건 정말 당연히 더 쉽게 할 수 있는 거죠. 그래서 첫 번째 얘기를 제시했던 거고 두 번째 아세안을 넘어서자고 했는데 사실 저는 이번 아세안 특사단 구성을 보고 참 아세안에 특히 이제 캄보디아 의장국이 되면서 캄보디아에 맡겨놨더니 그냥 엉망이 돼가는구나 이런 생각을 하고 있어요. 그래서 적어도 민주주의 문제는 아세안 중심성을 포기하도록 하는 어떤 국제사회의 압력을 좀 가하면 어떨까 이런 생각이 들어요. 사실 아세안 스스로 풀 수 없는 문제를 계속 아세안이 풀도록 두는 것도 사실 책임 방기라고 봐요. 이미 아세안은 민주주의 문제에서 자격 미달이라는 게 판명이 났고 그래서 뭐 적어도 그 문제에서는 한국이나 그러니까 강대국이 아닌 이제 민주주의를 좀 도입해서 실천해 나가고 있는 국가들이 개입을 할 필요가 있다고 봅니다. 사실 이게 전혀 선례가 없는 것도 아니에요. 사실 미얀마 소수종족과 정전협상을 하는데 사실 노르웨이가 큰 역할을 했거든요. 노르웨이가 개입해서 군부와 소수 종족 세력 간에 소위 정전협정이 뭐 한계는 있지만 맺어졌어요. 사실 그걸 참조하면 될 것 같아요. 아세안 특사단 구성에서 노르웨이가 좀 참여하는 방식으로 좀 이루어지면 어떨까 싶고 그다음에 이게 소위 뭐 K 민주주의, 뭐 K 외교, 뭐 새로운 연장 남방 정책일 수도 있겠고요. 그래서 이 부분에서 어떤 시민사회와 그다음에 어떤 정부와의 연대가 좀 필요하지 않을까. 그래서 아세안에 압력을 가해서 민주주의 문제에서만큼은 외부의 개입을 수용하는 방식으로 좀 압력을 가하면 좋겠다라는 게 저의 제안이라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 예, 이상.
네, 교수님 상세한 설명 감사드립니다. 제가 조한나 선생님한테 질문 하나 드리겠습니다. 선생님, 저희 한국과 뭐 한국이라면 정부도 그렇고 시민사회도 그럴 텐데 이렇게 우리 한국에서 필리핀의 민주주의를 위해 연대할 수 있는 방법 아니면 제안 있으면 말씀 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Yes, I think it is possible to build stronger solidarity between Korea and the Philippines, or particularly among freedom-loving people between Korea and the Philippines. So our host was mentioning earlier that actually there were quite a large number of K-drama fans in the Philippines, because that is also a phenomenon in the Philippines, who were actually part of the Lenny Kiko campaign, because you had all of these groups sprouting up, and they would give names to themselves, like BTS Army for Lenny and Kiko. You had all of these kinds of spontaneous groups springing up and aligning themselves with what is now known as the People's Campaign, which has transformed into a people's movement. I think opportunities like this to speak here at the Gwangju Democratic Forum and to present the situation in the Philippines to a wider group of Koreans is one way of informing the wider international community about the situation in the Philippines. So when I was in Gwangju to receive the Gwangju Prize for Human Rights in 2019, so I spoke not only in Gwangju but also for the the Korean Democracy Institution to young Korean students, and actually there was a great interest. There was a great interest in what is happening in the Philippines, because there are so many Koreans who come to the Philippines, and in fact in many cities in the Philippines, particularly before the pandemic, there was quite a sizable Korean population. They come here to study, to learn English, etc., like that. And I think that there is really that possibility. And I do know that there have been several Korean-Filipino solidarity groups that have already been organized. And so I invite you to actually continue observing what is happening in the Philippines, but also to maintain contacts with human rights movements and groups in the Philippines, so that you can be updated with what is happening there. Of course, we will always welcome international fact-finding missions. Even for these past elections, there was an international observer mission that tried to observe Philippine politics, or the last elections, and they have come out with a report, which has detailed all of the irregularities and cheating that occurred in these last elections. And so international support and international pressure, I think, is really very important. And therefore, I think not only in this forum, but also continuing after this, especially as I know that we Philippine activists will be in for very difficult times, in the years ahead, as we pursue, the never-ending struggle for human rights and peace. We hope that you continue to monitor what is happening in the Philippines, to speak out against human rights violations, to send support to victims of injustice, because authoritarian rule will continue, and therefore international solidarity is very important. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 오늘 아시아 곳곳에서 이 세션에 참가하신 모든 발표자분들께 감사드립니다. 그리고 함께해 주신 모든 한국 참가자분들께도 감사드립니다. 이후 미얀마, 그리고 캄보디아, 그리고 태국 관련돼서 계속된 논의가 이어질 예정입니다. 그러면 이것으로 아시아 민주주의에 대한 전망 세션은 1부는 일단 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
both from
미얀마에
Thailand. Okay, then 사진.
아 사진. 네.
Same to
아닙니다.